Alex. So today on the Café, we have myself, I'm Karen Biggs, I'm Spinal Cord Injury Nurse Specialist working for SIA, covering the Midlands and South and East Yorkshire. And then we have Damian on the call this afternoon, the Café, who is Spinal Cord Injury Nurse Specialist for the South West. We have Tony McGrath from 2 SCI chefs. If you have joined our cafes before, then him and John have done several cafes now, Tony, haven't you?
Quite a few,
quite a few, yeah.
Yeah, quite a few.
And we have Mark Henderson. Thank you very much, Mark, for leading on this cafe this afternoon. Mark is a senior vice chair of SIA and a barrister. And I'm going to sort of kick this afternoon's cafe off by asking you, Mark, if you can talk a little bit about your injury and your involvement with SIA to start with, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I got my injury in August 2018. On my first day, arrived in Sitges in Spain on holiday. And that was a complete injury at T11, so I'm paraplegic. So that was a complete life-changing event. I'd previously been quite active in queer scenes, socially and occasionally politically. But I sort of immediately fell out of that world into a space where I was denied access to most of the places that I'd previously gone to, and obviously struggling both with mobility and with all the problems that come from being sort of unable to communicate with internal organs. So I was in hospital in total for almost 6 months. I also had a serious head injury and got a hearing impairment from that. So I've got sort of both the intersection of homophobia and biphobia and ableism, and also different forms of disability discrimination. And sometimes the hearing impairment can intersect with the sort of wheelchair related ableism, so that you've got people bending over to talk to you, thinking that will make you better able to hear. And it looks like the sort of paradigm of people sort of bending over to talk loudly to a wheelchair user. So it was quite a struggle. And I then obviously, just as I was starting to get out and about more, and we talk about Parapride later, but just as I was starting, then COVID hit. So to some extent, that helped me in that it opened up a whole new world of online interaction, where mobility didn't matter. But on the other hand, it sort of stalled my physical reintegration, such as it was.
Yeah, of course. So talking about that reintegration, would you say that it was harder to reintegrate as a person with a spinal cord injury and being a wheelchair user, or was it harder to reintegrate back into the life that you had previously from your community?
I think there was a real sort of interplay between the two. There were a lot of problems that I faced that most people with a spinal cord injury face. But the LGBTQ scene has its own problems in terms of a lot of people who are not in wheelchairs or spinal cord injured feel excluded from the scene because they don't fit or have the sort of bodies that are expected in parts of the scene. And I mean, this is what we found in Parapride, which is pan disability. So a lot of different looking and acting people, but all of whom don't fit the sort of paradigm on the gay scene. So yeah, sort of, it's something that a lot of people that I spoke to for the article that came out in Forward magazine have described as sort of having found a place on the queer scene and then getting the injury and finding they were sort of back in square one, have it back in the closet, having to come out again in a different way, in a different body, often with a different mind.
Yeah, of course, of course. Tony, while Mark's been speaking, you've been nodding in agreement to
Yep.
things Mark's been saying. Can you share a little bit of your experience?
Yeah, I think
Please.
Mark actually hit the nail on the head when it's in the LGBTQ, especially some of the, well, I'd say 95% of the gay male world, you have to have a six pack and, like, you know, look like, I don't know, something that clearly I'm not. And I think there is definitely discrimination when it comes to if you're not the norm or you don't fit into that genre of gay guy or bi or a trans guy, whatever. I think there is a lot of I don't know, disconnect between people that have a serious life-changing injury and are in a wheelchair to get back, reintegrate themselves into the scene. I think there is a distinct lack of empathy within the LGBTQ world.
Yeah. And did you feel isolated within that community? And when, just remind me, Tony, when was your injury?
I was in 2013. I'd been with my partner 9 years. He decided, I was in hospital for 4.5 months, and after 4 days of me being strapped to the hospital bed, he said, I can't cope with this. Right. So after 9 years, he sort of went, which was great. It kind of freed me up to get my head sorted out, which was great. Yeah, it wasn't great at the time, but it was good. But then, like Mark was saying, like, where do we fit in to the gay scene or queer spaces? Not many of them are accessible. Clubs certainly aren't. Bars, you go in there and it's almost like people you know, it's like parting of the way and everyone's sort of staring at you. So, like, where do we go? We still have the same, I mean, gay clubs still have amazing music, and yeah. I know some great DJs, but there is nothing for people who are injured or even have brain injuries like Mark, or you know, we're in wheelchairs. There's nowhere for us to find our tribe, and it feels like we found, like Mark was saying, we found our tribe, and then it's like we got kicked out, and it's really hard to find people who understand and not the, oh, how's your back, is it getting better? And it's like, okay, yeah.
So have you been able to find your way back into those groups that you were in previously, or access to, like you were talking about, you know, the gay scene, and if you have, how have you been able to do that?
Well, I mean, I just tend to go online and see what people are up to. I've got friends that run gay pubs and gay bars, and they're always like, come down. I'm like, no, I don't really feel comfortable.
Right.
I don't want to be stared at. I don't want to be like, oh look, there's the fat guy in the wheelchair. Not as fat as he used to be, but do you know what I mean? It is like, because I went from like 55 kilos, which I know was very underweight, to over 138 kilos, just eating my feelings. There again, that's not a very gay thing, but I've come down a bit now. Yeah, I find it really hard to find that nook that I can reintegrate myself into it. It's hard.
Very hard.
Really hard.
So not only coming to terms with having a spinal cord injury and that impact, but also coming to terms with actually almost like losing, you know, that support, that scene that you were in before. Yeah. Okay.
Can I just ask as well? Just
of course.
It might not be a question that you would be able to answer, but is it different, do you think, for gay men compared to gay women? Because, you know, I've you know, dealt with people with spinal cord injury, you know, gay women, and their experience, or my perception of their experience, is that there isn't quite the same type of misperceptions, I guess, with how, you know, they would fit into, you know, a particular type of scene.
I definitely think kind of physiology, is that the right word? I don't know, Mark.
Sorry, I guess the point I was trying to make is, and this might be really stereotypical, but if someone's got, you know, a more sort of maternal inclination, whether, you know, gay women are perhaps more accepting of, you know, somebody's disability, because certainly, you know, I've seen patients with, you know, gay women that they're in very successful, open, understanding relationships, and but, you know, whether they would still integrate into their own you know, sort of scene pre-injury. Yeah, it's not a question that I've asked, but yeah, my guess is that maybe they would be perhaps more accepting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously hard to generalize, particularly for a cis man, but I mean, certainly in Power Pride, we have a range of men, women, non-binary, cis, trans, with, as I said, a full sort of spectrum of disabilities, all of whom pretty much have shared a feeling of being alienated to one degree or another from the sort of standard gay scene, and sort of finding a home and a new community in Power Pride. So I think the sort of experience of ableism spans all parts of the queer disabled community.
Okay, and have you found other, you know, sources of support? You know, having, you know, a disability as well as, you know, being gay as well, because certainly it's made me look at the way that I teach, to make sure that if I'm teaching about sexual function, I'm not just teaching in the mindset of teaching straight men, for example. So, but in order for me to be able to do that, to be able to teach more broadly, you know, I've had a look online, and trying to find information online, it's really, really difficult. I have pulled up a website called Enhance the UK, and we've met some of the some of the people that run that group, and that appears to be a very inclusive group, to talk about sexual function, sexuality, not just looking at somebody's disability, but just looking at that person as a whole, irrespective of what their sexual orientation is. But outside of that, it's just very difficult to find other areas of support to support the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah, no, Karen and I were discussing before this cafe that I am not able to come here armed with a long list of support groups, which is part of the problem. And one of the particular stories that I highlighted in the magazine was someone who had been in a long-term relationship, left that relationship, and had just sort of developed a new life in London on the queer scene with multiple friends, and then got his injury. And as a result of the issues with ableism, with his flat not being accessible, with it not being made accessible, with him not being able to find other accessible accommodation, he had to move back to his home in an area where he knew nobody in the LGBTQ community, and as a result felt sort of pushed back into the closet. But that arose through his injury, and then through the lack of accessible housing, had those knock-on effects. I also spoke to people who had issues with the care they received and concerns about homophobia there, and feeling that they couldn't be out in that situation. I would say that Para Pride, hopefully we can give the sort of the website, was a huge support. A lot of people have said that it feels like finding a new community on the queer scene. Unfortunately, they've obviously been hit by COVID and in terms of in-person events, but I'm hoping that we'll be putting something on by the summer. I do think that there is more need, because obviously SCI LGBTQ people have particular problems because from the nature of the injuries, and I think that SIA, it would be great if SIA could sort of sponsor or promote a network of LGBTQ members, whether as a Facebook group or something else, where we could come together more to discuss these things and maybe eventually have an in-person meet.
Yeah, you're talking about Para Pride. You're talking about Para Pride, Mark. Can you tell us a little bit more about it and what it is support that they can offer?
Yes, it was started in 2019. I went to the launch event in the Royal Vauxhall Tavern, though even then they had to arrange sort of for a mobiloo parked outside because the toilets themselves were not sufficiently accessible, though the venue was very supportive and has been since on other events. But it's a good example of where even as Tony was saying, people on the scene or who run venues or promote events want to be welcoming and accessible. The restrictions on the venues often still make them, still create their own inaccessibility and barriers. And obviously, most LGBTQ venues or events won't be able to fund Mobiloo at every event. So it's currently it's mainly based around events, whether online or hopefully soon in person. We marched on the last proper in-person Pride in 2019 under the Para Pride banner near the front of the parade, as Stonewall was arranging for marginalized groups. So we got to march in between queer Muslims and trans groups, which was great. But even then, and even though there was supposed to be accessible facilities throughout the route, one of the tube stations was closed, but the organizers didn't tell us in advance, and that created problems for people in wheelchairs getting there. So there's a lot that people don't think about trying to be accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, obviously we're discussing now, I don't know if anybody on the call has got any questions that they wanted to ask, or anything that they wanted to share. Damien has put the link in the chat to Para Pride, and also the Facebook link as well for you all. I will open it up, and if anybody has anything they want to share or ask, them please do.
Just to add that, just looking at the Para Pride website, there's not a lot of information on there. I thought there may have been other links to other areas.
No, there is. I've had a look as well. Yeah.
But the Facebook group seems to be a lot more active, so possibly you'll get a lot more interaction through the Facebook group. But they've also got Instagram and Twitter as well.
Yeah, no, Twitter in particular is where a lot of stuff gets shared. And probably I don't use Instagram a lot, but probably Insta as well. But I've just shared the Twitter feed.
Thank you. That's great.
I've got a question for both Damien and Mark. I'm not generalizing now, but gay men can be quite, it's all about sex and stuff. So what are your thoughts about reintegrating when sexual function isn't the greatest or doesn't work? How do you confidently discuss that sensitively with someone that, everyone likes sex, but there's no exceptions, but gay men seem to, like, you've got the Grindr and you've got the Tinder and you've got everything, you can get it, it's like Just Eat, you can just get it in 10 minutes. But when you have something that when you've got a sexual function that doesn't work, and again it's almost like you are being hidden away because you think you don't have a value within the scene or in a relationship. So how would you go about sensitively discussing that with someone?
I think certainly the education that I have given and still give now, well, I just for those that aren't aware, I worked at Salisbury Spinal Centre for 25 years as a clinical nurse specialist, and I was involved in a lot of the patient education. And when I first joined the spinal unit back in 1996, there weren't many gay people with a spinal cord injury coming through, partly because having a spinal cord injury is rare enough as it is. But there was that sense that either the person with a spinal cord injury didn't make this big song and dance about the fact that they were gay, so a lot of the staff didn't know. So in that respect, it's like, well, you would just address the issues as you would do with any of our other patients. But I think as time went on, as I got to know patients that were openly gay, but I think they still felt that they couldn't be as open as they wanted to be, having that conversation with them, I think it's just finding people that are comfortable to talk about sexual function. And even with our patients that are straight, it's not always easy to find somebody that feels comfortable to talk about sexual function. The most important thing is that it shouldn't not be discussed. It should still be, people should still have the opportunity to talk about it. And if one person doesn't feel comfortable, then I would say we'll find somebody else that does feel comfortable to talk about it. And I've had just very honest, open conversations. I think in the same way that people that are straight, their sexual preferences can be completely different as well. So just having an open conversation about, well, you don't have to go into the real sort of nuts and bolts of it, but what is it that you would like out of a sexual relationship? And then having that conversation, and they said, well, this would be my preference, and then it would get me thinking about the physicality side of things. Well, how can that be managed? If it's an issue with regards to erectile function or erectile dysfunction, then these are what your options are. If it's a case of how you have sex, then we can discuss the bladder issues, the bowel issues, equipment that's available to enable that person to be in the position that they want to be in as well. And I can put up a link to a website that has various pieces of equipment that that can be used to enable that person to have sex in the way that they want to have sex. But there shouldn't be a taboo about it. I think sexual intercourse is part of human nature. It doesn't matter who you are. But I think it is just having that open, honest conversation, and the fact that they can ask me anything. I'm not going to get embarrassed. And I would also talk to them about the fact that if you have a spinal cord injury, even things like having bowel care carried out, that might trigger a reflex erection. I think it's having that understanding of how your spinal cord injury affects your body, not to be embarrassed about it, but you think, well, and I'm sort of very conscious of the fact that we're talking at a certain time of day, and I want to be able to not cause offense, but I think I want people to think, well, if it means that they can achieve an erection by a physical means one way or another, whether that's through stimulation of the bowel through bowel care, it's getting the person into the mindset, well, at least I know that I can achieve an erection in that way. Staff should also be aware that this is something to be able to explain to their patients, that if I went up to a patient, whether they're gay or straight, and said, this is what the bowel care involves, you may get a reflex erection. It's a reflex. It's something that will happen because of your spinal cord injury, so that they're not embarrassed. The staff don't feel embarrassed, but you can use that knowledge to be able to explain to them, well, if those reflexes are intact and you can get a reflex erection, then these are your options. You know, you can go through the medication route of things like Viagra, Cialis. You know, your preference as to how you have sex, you know, how you manage your bladder to make sure your bladder's empty, making sure your bowels are empty, because anybody could potentially have a bowel accident, whether they're gay or straight, just through you know, the sort of the motion of having sex, I guess. So in some ways, the advice that we give isn't necessarily any different, depending on, you know, whether somebody's gay or straight. It's just making them aware that this is how your body functions because of, you know, how you've had a spinal cord injury. This is how you can manage A, B, and C. But I will find the links. In fact, what I've got an information sheet that I used to give out to the patients. It's just got sort of 4 or 5 sort of key websites that are good sources of information to go to, you know, so people can find the right information. And yeah, it doesn't matter, you know, that it's not specific to any sexual orientation either. You know, when it comes to equipment that's available, you know, it's equipment that, you know, anybody can use.
I think, Damien, it's fair to say, isn't it, that there is a apparent reluctance amongst healthcare professionals to discuss sexual dysfunction for anybody.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
You know, we receive calls and we receive referrals from people who just have nobody to talk to them about it, or if they've brought it up around sexual function, then people have just shied away from discussing the topic. So, and that is, in my experience, mostly for those that are heterosexual. So with somebody who is gay trying to bring up that discussion with healthcare professionals, I would imagine they may even find more of a barrier to people wanting to discuss it.
I think so. And I think certainly from my experience, if we're the healthcare professionals that have got the knowledge and the understanding, I almost feel that it's down to us to, you know, offer the opportunity to talk about things, you know, anything, rather than, you know, that person, you know, making the first move, if you like, by asking us. You know, whenever, you know, I ran clinics at Salisbury Spinal Centre, I'll be talking about bladder, talking about bowels, talking about skin, talking about sexual function, in pretty much the same way. You know, everything is relevant, and I think the approach that you take, to show that you are open to talk about it, you know, the time might not be right at that specific time, but it's just to make people aware that, you know, if you wanted to talk about sexual function, I'm very happy to talk about it. If you don't feel comfortable doing it now, you know, here's my contact details. If you don't feel comfortable talking to me, then there are other people that you could talk to. But it's just giving people the opportunity to know that there is somebody that they can talk to. And I think, yeah, that's the most important thing. So rather than dismissing it, and, you know, I'm aware that this will go onto our YouTube channel, but, you know, I've dealt with other healthcare professionals that pretty much just choose not to discuss it, whether, you know, they don't feel comfortable to talk about it. But, you know, I'd much rather they still had that conversation. That this is to give you a real generalization, that if you want to talk about how your bowel functions, you know, we have a bowel review service, you know, go and speak to these people. Likewise, if you want to talk about sexual function, even if you don't feel comfortable talking about it, then you can go and speak to, you know, other members of the team. But yeah, just giving people the opportunity to know that there is somebody that they can talk to, you know, whether it's now, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's, you know, a year down the line, because it might not be the first thing on that person's mind at that particular time. But just knowing that there is an open door, that, you know, people can just give you a knock and, you know, you talk about anything that they want to, you know, at a time that's convenient to them. But I will try and find, I'll try and find the information just with some of those links. And I think if someone's quite happy just to do some talking while I'm searching, I'll try and find the link and pop that into the chat function.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's all really useful to hear. My own impression of the spinal unit, where obviously things are far more advanced in terms of dealing with sexual function post-injury than in many other healthcare settings. But my impression was that it was often talked about in terms of fertility and how can I still have children? And I don't know whether it was because that was felt to be an easier way of presenting it, of justifying the resources going into it. But it was often felt like it was still aimed at a model of sort of when the spinal units were mainly dealing with young men who they thought would have a priority of how am I going to have a family now? Or how am I going to start a family with my partner, rather than looking at, as we now have, a wider range of ages, genders, as well as sexualities, and thinking about it and presenting it so that people actually take up the support in terms of how am I going to engage sexually with people? How am I going to get pleasure from a sex life? How different is that going to look?
Yeah, and I completely agree with that as well, 100%. And it has made me deliver the education that I do deliver in a very different way. And I don't just talk about sexual function, I talk about sexuality as well. Because the two go hand in hand. And I think if you can understand one, then it makes you understand, the physicality that much more. So, understanding, what that person's sexual orientation is, what their sexual preferences are, how they feel about themselves, how they like to present themselves. That is all part and parcel of, the same issue. I often use the examples from like a female perspective, partly because I don't know, it's probably got a little bit more resonance, because if I said, well, it's how you style your hair, and they're looking at me thinking, well, you haven't got any hair, so what are you talking about? But but for without stereotyping, but for a woman, how they style their hair can make them feel more comfortable in their own skin about how they present themselves. Can they put on their makeup themselves? Can they shave their legs themselves? If you've got someone that's got a high level spinal cord injury, that they might not be able to do any of that, or they might need support to do that, and that's taking away to a degree how they feel about themselves. And I know that you've alluded to the fact that with some gay men, that there's, you almost have to fit into that category of being, have the six pack, physically, how the media would, well, some of the media would want you to sort of be presented as, that, almost like the look of perfection. But I guess in the real world, that's an even smaller minority, that's even harder to achieve. But I think, how someone feels about themselves, if they feel comfortable about themselves, and if they're able to present themselves in the way that they feel content, I guess, whether that's the clothes that they wear, how they style their hair. I think if you can find ways to be able to manage that, then giving somebody that, I guess that must sort of give you that sort of inner confidence to a degree as well, to think, well, actually, I feel quite good about myself, irrespective of what other people think that I should look like. If you feel happy and content. And I appreciate I'm probably talking about things that areas that I don't have experience of within the the sort of realms of LGBTQ plus, but all I can say is that it's important to recognize how somebody does feel about themselves, and what you can do to help them to achieve that as well. And when it comes to sexual preferences, if you can understand somebody's sexuality, then the physicality side of things, it makes it that much easier to be able to focus that information more directly to that individual, rather than giving a generic talk about, if you have a spinal cord injury, this is how it affects erectile function. If you want children, these are your options, without exploring all the different areas, the whole sort of spectrum of the LGBTQ plus community. So I when you're given a limited amount of time to be able to talk about everything, I think it's important to try and focus on some of the key elements. But talking about sexuality, and the fact that sexuality doesn't just mean straight men, straight women, that there is a spectrum, and it's the same with looking at people's cultural beliefs as well. So if you were a gay man and you were a Muslim, for example, that adds another component to how you would give that advice. And it's not easy, it's not easy, because it's very difficult to be an expert in spinal cord injury. I think Karen would agree, you're constantly learning. And I think as we grow culturally, the advice that we give changes as well. So we're not just reading from a textbook that was written in the 1950s. We evolve as society evolves. So it's important to to keep up with society, or even get one step ahead, so that people that are living in society with their spinal cord injury, they're not frantically trying to find the information. If we can almost stay one step of the game, one step ahead, and provide the information, be a source of information for people, at least as far as come and talk to us. We might not have all the answers, but we'll do the best job that we can to try and direct you, point you in the right direction to other areas of support. I'm going to take a breath, I think.
Yeah,
so I have put in the chat function, there's a website called Spokes, and there, if you have a look on the website, this does take you to the page where there's various sex aids, positioners, to help somebody with a spinal cord injury to be able to have sex in the position that they want to have sex, because we know that having sex, it's not just one position. Some of the equipment is quite expensive, but some of it is very inexpensive. And just to give you an example, and I can pop this link into the chat function as well. And this information is not, these sexual aids, they're not, I don't think, designed specifically for somebody with a particular sexual orientation. This equipment that can be used by anybody. So I've just put a link into, it's called an inflatable position master, quite a catchy name, but it's essentially, it's like a wedge shaped pillow. So you can use it in different ways. It's got handles. You can use it whether you're on your front, use it whether you're on your back, and it's £26.66.
Very reasonable.
Very reasonable. But I think from my experience, the world of spinal cord injury, you learn to adapt to your given situation. You know, I've often said that when you have a spinal cord injury, if you have the opportunity to go to a specialist centre, we're not making you experts in your condition. You know, it's a bit like preparing you for your driving test. We get you to a certain point, so that when you are discharged into, you know, the wider world outside, you've got a basic skill set to be able to manage your situation. It's not until you actually get out of hospital that you start to adapt what suits you best, and you know, and that can be you know, anything, you know, how you get about in your wheelchair, you know, just speaking to other people about you know, their situations, you know, what worked better for them. You know, I guess, you know, it's most of the learning is done outside of hospital, you know, through talking to your peers, talking to, you know, other people that can support you. And people are very adaptable, and, you know, and it's not one size fits all. But I guess, you know, probably the point I'm trying to make is that if people feel open enough to be able to talk openly to other people, or, you know, we offer people the opportunity to come and talk to us, then, you know, maybe together we can get our heads together and think, well, okay, this is what you want. You know, have you tried this? Or, you know, we could signpost you to, you know, somewhere else. Because I think from my experience, what you want to do is not like reinventing the wheel. Chances are, you know, someone's already thought about that as well themselves, and they probably tackled that issue one way or another. So sharing experience, you know, is massive, but creating a culture where somebody feels comfortable to share those experiences, you know, is something else that, you know, maybe we can facilitate, you know, through SIA.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you were just saying then, Damian, and everything you've said is absolutely right. But sharing those experiences and finding those people to share it with is really hard for everybody at times who has a spinal cord injury. Add into that you want to be able to share your experiences or get support from the LGBTQ community, then that's, you know, that's really difficult to find, isn't it, Mark?
Yeah. There are, and Damian, what Damian says highlights these two intersecting issues. In reality, in terms of the physical and indeed mental effects of the injury on future sexual life, the issues are universal regardless of your sexuality, and what you need is to be able to get through to someone like Damian, who you have the confidence that they are going to be able to listen to whatever it is you want to do sexually in the future, and then apply his skills to give you the advice on AIDS management, etc., that will enable you to get what you want. So yeah, it's that intersection between the physical impact and the sort of homophobia related barriers that prevent people perhaps getting the advice that they need. I put into the chat a couple of additional links, one of which is a really excellent series of video stories that Power Pride have posted on their YouTube channel. I think one of them is spinal cord injured, but they all speak to the issues that disabled queer people have in interacting in their communities. So I'd highly recommend them, but I'd also recommend using the resources that SIA provides, people like Damian, who can provide the practical advice that people need in a totally non-judgmental, supportive, and sort of sex-positive context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think definitely, I don't know if you agree, Damien, from today, that we need to see this as like a stepping stone to move forward in the engagement that we have in relation to you know, almost like thinking about a future article or a future campaigns really about this. And Mark, I don't know how involved you are in campaigning, but I think it's certainly something that from an SIA perspective we need to become involved in.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm involved obviously in SIA's campaigns on care at the moment.
Yes.
The research we've been doing recently shows the intersection between sort of homophobia and ableism in the care system. So this issue sort of spans a number of other issues on which SIA is active, like accessible housing and the lack thereof, where people used to interact with the queer community, pushing people back to old family homes in the country and back in the closet. Again, really showing the intersection of the sort of new discrimination that hits people, at least people who were non-disabled before their injury, together with that homophobia that they might have thought that they had sort of under control.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
You know, SIA, you know, we are a user-led service, so you know what we do is based on what our members want us to do. So there is the What Matters survey, which is out there at the moment, you know, to find out what it is that's important to you. You know, what would you like us to address? What do you want us to highlight? Because if people say, well, you know, this is an area that we'd like more support with, you know, we can facilitate that. But we need to understand what it is that, you know, we need to be doing. I have also put in the chat function as well, there's another website called Enhance the UK, and there's a particular section there about just normalizing sex and disability, and it's definitely worth you know, just having a look through their website as well. And I think, you know, what we're trying to achieve is that the world isn't black and white. You know, we live in a multicolored, vibrant, multicultural society, which is expanding, and you know, we have to change, you know, with society as well. So you know, do have a look at that link as well. But you know, do come to us as well if you want any advice and support. You know, the teaching that I used to do, generally the most time effective way was to do it in a group, and that wasn't, it was a good way to, you know, sort of present yourself and some of the key information, but you can pretty much guarantee that unless you're of a certain personality, you might not want to be asking questions in a group session. So I'd always give people the option that, yeah, come and talk to me on your own. Come and talk to me with your partner as well, so that your partner understands how your spinal cord injury has affected you. And I think relationships are probably more likely to succeed if the partner has an understanding of the impact of somebody's spinal cord injury. So, you know, having that knowledge between both parties can make a massive difference to their understanding, you know, their empathy, because I don't think people are looking for sympathy. You know, they just want to know that they're being treated in the same way as anybody else, and knowing where to get information from. So, you know, after this, you know, this will be put out onto our website. So if people do want to, people do have a look at this video, play it back, if they do want to get in touch with us, do go onto our website. There is a section on there that says get support. Depending on where you live, there's a drop down box per county, or fill that out, and that will just get triaged out through the team. I think any of the nursing team will feel happy to talk to anybody that would rather speak to us on a one-to-one basis. So do get in touch that way as well. I'm conscious of the time as well.
Yeah, I was about to say that as well.
And let's see if we can set up some sort of LGBTQ SCI network coming out of this.
That'd be amazing.
That'd be good.
Yeah. We are over time now. If anybody, as Damian said, if anybody does want to reach out to us out of the cafe, then please do go onto our website to link in with us. Thank you very much, Mark and Tony, for sharing today and being part of the cafe. And yeah, I think unless anybody else has got any questions or anything they want to ask us in the last couple of minutes, then we'll close the cafe. But I'll just is there anybody else that would like to ask anything or share anything? Okay, thank you.